The 13th edition of Talkin' Tar Heels starts right now. Hello, everybody. Welcome in. It's another episode of Talkin' Tar Heels. Really excited to bring you this one. We got a lot to get to today. We are going to be recapping NC Central and previewing James Madison. So, we got a lot to get to, as I mentioned. So, let's jump straight into this. We'll jump into the NC Central recap. Gonna do a little quick recap here. It was not pretty. But Carolina got a 45 to 10 win over NC Central. It was a game where Carolina outscored NC Central 28 to nothing in the fourth quarter. Final score not really indicative of how this game went. It was 17 to 10 at the end of the third quarter. Neither offenses could really get anything going. NC Central was down to a backup quarterback. Carolina was swapping quarterbacks between Jacoby Criswell and Connor Harrell, so neither team really had much offensive rhythm. But let's get to my three takeaways that I have from this game. And takeaway number one is that Jacoby Criswell needs to be quarterback one for this team. And he did, in fact, Mac Brown announced that he did, in fact, win the starting job over the course of this week. But with Connor Harrell, when he was the QB, Carolina just flat out struggled on offense. There was no rhythm. His stat line was very concerning. It was 2 for 6 and through the air, just 22 yards. I mean, it was just Carolina could only find success in the ground game, and that's really the only thing that Harrell brings that Criswell does not. When Criswell entered the game, there was a better sense of rhythm, and overall the offense just did better. Carolina here Mac Brown said originally that the quarterbacks were going to split reps and that both would play against James Madison, but of course he has recently announced that Jacoby Criswell will end up starting. And I feel like earlier he just wanted James Madison to have to scout both, which honestly he did this against Minnesota and I feel like it kind of worked. So we'll see what happens against James Madison. Takeaway number two is the defense is the real deal. And I understand it's only NC Central, but I've seen enough from this defense to convince me that it's good enough to translate into conference play. They stopped Minnesota, who not the best offense, but not bad either. They were good against Charlotte and then good against NC Central. They only gave up 167 yards of total offense. There was only really one drive where NC Central was really able to gash him, and it was the first drive of the game. 12 plays. They went 12 plays, 75 yards for a touchdown. If Carolina can continue this strong defense for into conference play, there's a reasonable that the only missing piece is a decent offense. So Carolina is able to do the same or better against a JMU team that has kind of struggled on offense. I think it's about time to start saying this is a defense that can be capable of big things. And then takeaway number three is the offensive line could be way better than we thought. And again, it's NC Central. Like Carolina had a physicality advantage, they had a size advantage, but it doesn't matter. Anytime you give up or you don't give up any sacks and your running backs have 8 yards to carry, it's something notable. And I feel like this offensive line did a really good job. They got a good push all night, and most of the time they gave whoever was throwing the ball a clean pocket. Very little very rarely did you see Jacoby Criswell and Connor Harrell really have to scramble unless it was a designed rollout or a run. So Carolina could definitely use this group. Carolina could definitely have this group continue to be solid. It will definitely be a big benefit to the Tar Heels. Let's move to the stock report, and it's going to be a lot of what you saw in the takeaways. Stock up, offensive line. This group was more than solid against an inferior opponent, and it's what you like to see. They'll probably need to continue this dominance against James Madison. James Madison's been very solid on defense. This offensive line could definitely help Carolina with their offensive rhythm. Stock up, Jacoby Criswell. In my mind, and obviously in Mac Brown's mind as well, this is now Criswell's job to lose. He was a very solid 14 for 23 for 161 yards and a touchdown. He looked more he looked more in command of the offense. He was a much better fit for the offense than I think most people realize, and I think that's why he ended up winning this job. Stock up Jeff Collins. I don't think people are giving Jeff Collins, the defensive coordinator, enough credit for how good this defense has looked through the first 3 games of the season. This is a defense that was not great under Gene Chizik. They were kind of average. They struggled with making adjustments, but Jeff Collins' defenses almost looked better the longer the game has gone on, and I think that's very very encouraging to us that we can expect this defense to show up all throughout the game and not fall behind on adjustments. Stock down, and this is the only stock down that I have before we get in to the James Madison preview. The wide receivers have just struggled in these first 3 games. There's not a wide receiver that has more than 100 yards receiving. Bryson Nesbitt's the only receiver, so to speak, and he's a tight end that has over 100 yards with 104 yards. And I mean, this is just a group that we need someone to step up, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, especially with like guys like J.J. Jones, Kobe Paysour. We haven't seen much out of Kobe Paysour yet this year. Is Christian Hamilton the real deal? Can he step up? He actually leads all receivers, and he only has 3 receptions and yards, but he's averaging 31 yards a reception. So we need guys to step up on the receiving end. Now let's turn to our James Madison preview. Let's look at the matchup first, as we always do. North Carolina, they're 3-0. They're averaging 34 points per game. They're giving up 15.7. They're averaging 418.3 yards per game. They're giving up 256.3 yards. Their head coach is Mac Brown. For James Madison, they're 2-0. They're averaging 21 points per game. As I mentioned, this has been a little bit of a struggling defense, but they've only given up 7 points and 6 points in their 2 games defensively. So they're averaging 6.5 points per game allowed. They're averaging 349 yards per game. They're giving up 296.5. Their head coach is Bob Chesney. He is a first-year head coach. Last game they beat Gardner Webb in kind of a just a not a game you really enjoy watching. They beat them 13-6. The quarterback comparison for these two teams: Jacoby Criswell, his season stats: 15 for 24, 163 yards and a touchdown. For James Madison, they've got Alonzo Barrett III, 24 for 40, 354 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception on the season. When we look at this game, the key storyline is the Carolina quarterback battle really over. And in my mind, I say yes, because I think Jacoby Criswell has a solid lock on this job. I think there's very little that he can do to lose the job at this point. He's had much more command of the offense, as we talked about earlier. He's been performing better. He's been more accurate on intermediate throws, and I just think he brings more to the table. He's a better fit to the offense. So I feel that this is Criswell's job, and I don't see him losing it anytime soon. Let's look at some keys to the game, and I have 2 for this episode. Number 1 is get Omarion Hampton going, and we've seen this against Charlotte and NC Central, but against Minnesota, it kind of took a while for Hampton to get going against a very good defense. We didn't really see much out of Hampton. Carolina needs and JMU's a good defense, so Carolina needs to get Hampton going early. I think you can. Yeah, I mean Hampton's gonna get at least back to the line of scrimmage, no matter when JMU hits him. So this goes kind of with the offensive line thing. Like, if the offensive line can continue to get this good push, it should not be hard to get Omarion Hampton going, which should in turn get the rhythm of the offense going, and overall just allow Carolina to be successful on offense. And kind of going with this first key is dictate the pace. Carolina, and if they run the football well, this should not be an issue. Dictating the pace of this game, I feel like if Carolina comes out and allows James Madison to kind of play their way, let James Madison just dominate the flow and the pace of this game. It could be reasonable to say that James Madison has a very solid shot at beating the Tar Heels, but if Carolina can come out, run the ball, and just set the groundwork and lay that pace, then I think Carolina's going to be hard to beat. Because overall, I feel like Carolina does have the physicality advantage against James Madison. This is a Sun Belt team going against a Power 5 team, Power 4 team. Carolina needs to assert that dominance early in this game. Now, very quickly before we get out of here, some players to watch. Defensive end Des Evans, coming off of a game where he was huge. He had 4 tackles, a sack, and 3 tackles for loss. The only reason I did not put him in my stock report was because of the multiple penalties he was guilty of. Can he make the same impact on this game without the penalties? He needs, and I mean, last week was his best performance stat wise in a Tar Heel uniform, but the penalties kind of nixed that for me. So can Des Evans show what we've been waiting kind of 4 years for him to show? You know, he came in as a highly touted recruit. Can he do it again against James Madison? And then kind of back to the wide receivers thing from earlier. JJ Jones, where has he been this year? I mean, he's had 6 receptions, but this guy was supposed to be the number one, the guy that we could turn to for 6, 7 receptions a game. He has 6 receptions through 3 games. You know, this is really a prove it game for the entire wide receiver core for Carolina. You know, Christian Hamilton has looked like a very capable wide receiver, and he should continue to get high snaps. But guys like J.J. Jones, you know, Kobe Paysor, you know, we haven't seen these guys. We need to see these guys, and we need to see these guys in a big way against James Madison. I'm not saying go out there and have 2 receivers go over 100 yards. I'm saying we need to see these guys have put together, you know, 6, 7 reception game where you have, you know, 70 yards. So final thoughts and my score prediction. You know, I kind of wrestled with predicting this game because James Madison hasn't looked that good on offense, but then again, neither is Carolina. And James Madison's has a solid defense, but then again, it's against Charlotte and Gardner Webb. You know, I didn't really know how to predict this game, but I feel like if Carolina is able to dictate the pace of this game and find that rhythm offensively, there's no reason to believe that Carolina can't win this game by double digits. 2 scores, you know, maybe even 3 scores if they get in a rhythm offensively, because James Madison hasn't really found one either. You know, their defense kind of dictated the game against Charlotte, in which they scored 30 points, and then against Gardner Webb, you only scored 13. So you really don't know what you're getting out of James Madison. So with that said, I feel like Carolina is going to do a good job of dictating the pace. I think it's going to be I think it's going to be a close game. I don't think Carolina is going to run away with this one. And with that said, my final score prediction is Carolina 28, James Madison 17. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, drop a like. If you're new, subscribe to the channel. You know, I'd like to hear your guys' score prediction. If you're able to watch this episode before the game starts at 12 o'clock Eastern time, then drop a comment. Give me your score prediction. You know, maybe even go ahead and predict the Duke game next week. I know it's huge. I'm going to try to drop a recap of this game and a Duke preview. So 2 videos coming up next week, hopefully, and I will see you for those next week.